Good. Yeah. He's a guy. I say hi to Lindsay too. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I've gotten a couple emails from you.
I've been bugging you a little bit.
No, you have not.
Hello there again.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad that I'm here for this because this sounds like it's going to be right in our area.
It
That
sure
yeah,
is.
so I'm going to.
But tomorrow's going to be even more exciting.
Okay. Is that right?
Bring your dog.
It's going to be a long one. Is that what you
It's
mean?
going to be a long and maybe not social media.
Okay.
Ken and Rusty will typically sit back here. I will always
Near the door.
The staff meeting for February 1st, 2020, and I think that our communications director wants to brief us on some new staff, so we'll start off with that. Morning, Akeem.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Akeem Ashford, Communications Director. So I think we were planning on possibly doing this later, but happy to do so now. This is a happy time for me because since I actually started, this is the first time that I've got a full staff, and then I've got an additional person on our staff. So I first want to bring up Stephanie Bergman. She is a well-known name here in the Wichita area, served for many years with KSN News. She was a competitor for many years. So instead of kicking her butt on TV, we're now working together. But we're really excited to have her. She is our COVID/ARPA communications coordinator. So I'd like to allow her to say a few words, Chairman.
Morning, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Akeem. And yes, it's fun to be on the same team now. And I'm very excited to be with the county. I knew a lot of you from my prior work. And Lacey served on the board of directors for Humankind Ministries. And I'm anxious to get to know some of the others better. Everyone has been very kind and patient with all my questions. As a former reporter, always have a lot of questions. So I think the job that I've been hired to do is really important, a little daunting, but I'm hoping together we can really make a difference. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, and welcome to the staff. We appreciate it. I know that we've been able to cross paths with the Firefighters Museum, with things like Excellence in Public Service, and a number of other events that you've been kind enough to host, and we want to welcome you to Sedgwick County.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
And Commissioners, so Stephanie's first day was yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to bring her to every commissioner, but as we see you in the office, we'll make sure that she, as well as Carolina, gets by to meet all of you. The next person I'd like to bring up is Carolina Lozano. Carolina actually fills our social media coordinator position, so we're really excited to have her. She's already doing some great things, and allow her to also say a few words.
Well, good morning and welcome.
Hi, so I also come from a TV background. I worked at KWCH for 3 years, and I remember when I first met Akeem, I was actually an intern at KWCH back in 2017, so, I've kind of been around for a little bit, and I'm really excited to be here with the county and just continue to serve my community in a different way. That's one of the reasons why I got into communications, into journalism, because I wanted to serve my community, and I want to continue doing that now here with the county. And I'm from Wichita, so I'm excited to stay here. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And again, welcome. I did have a chance to meet you. I appreciate you being here today and joining the staff for Sedgwick County. I think before long, the TV stations are going to kind of complain to us because we keep stealing all our staff. But we're happy to have you here. Thank you.
Awesome.
And that is all we have for today, Chairman.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Tom, what do we have on agenda today?
Good morning, Chairman and Commission. 4 things on the agenda, or on the workshop agenda today. Lindsay's going to get up first and talk about, kind of preview the larger discussion we're going to have tomorrow at the commission meeting regarding ARPA dollars, and final guidance, of course, is out. It's a lengthy document. Lindsay has read it twice already, so she'll get up and give us a briefing on that. Tanya Cole will then talk about, we'll kind of just go back over the admin building options and maybe hear some discussion from the commission on a way forward there. And Mike Papoon will talk about, of course, the legislature is in session now, and Mike wants to just talk through some protocols regarding how the commission will handle that, and part of that will also dovetail into a discussion of to think about moving staff meeting from Tuesday morning to Friday temporarily while the legislature is in session, because it positions us better for the upcoming week to testify and put testimony in. So we'll have that discussion at the end. So we'll start with Lindsay, talk about ARPA, work our way through the list.
Morning, Lindsay.
Good morning.
All right, for the record, good morning, now that I'm on the microphone. So as Tom said, we are going to regale you tomorrow with all kinds of information about ARPA. I had sent you a PowerPoint that hits the high points because, as Tom said, the final rule is a lengthy document. I brought it for illustration purposes. This is what it looks like. So, lots of good stuff, but NACO has done an excellent job of summarizing that, and so we'll present that tomorrow. Brent will also share with you tomorrow the results of the letters of interest as well as our ongoing needs survey so that we can start laying the groundwork for how you all want to allocate funds. Before we do that, what we wanted to talk about today is the standard operating procedure that we are working through now so that we do not have a repeat of CARES, where we were kind of, as Brent said, building the airplane as we went. We are being very deliberate this time about making sure that folks know exactly all of the requirements and making sure that we have a defined process from the get-go and everyone knows their role and responsibility. So this is still in draft form, which is why you do not have copies. We have a meeting this afternoon to solidify a part of it. But once that's done, we'll make sure you have copies. But since it's a procedure, it doesn't come up to the commission level to have to ratify. But what we wanted to go through are just some of the expectations that we have and some of the steps that we want to take. Now, tomorrow when we talk about ARPA, one of the questions we will put forward to you, as Tom has shared, we don't need a decision tomorrow, but we will in the coming weeks, is the Commission's level of risk tolerance. Because as we go through these steps, your level of risk tolerance will determine how much and how in-depth we do our subrecipient monitoring that is required under federal uniform guidance. So we have broken this out into several pieces. We have a pre-award phase, we have an award phase, and we have a post-award phase. So we are going to go through a competitive grant application process. And so what that means is after the commission has determined priorities and we have set up programs that you ratify, then we will go forward with crafting all of that in a grant portal and allowing people to compete for the dollars that you allocate in total to those programs. So what we have already done in the pre-award phase is go through the letter of interest. So that was posted for 4 weeks. And like I said, Brent will share the details with you tomorrow of what we heard back. Then what we will do is a slightly different twist than what we did in CARES. So we will do a notice of funding opportunity, and that will be when we actually announce programs and begin selecting applications. So if you remember with CARES, the notice of funding opportunity actually sounded and acted more like our letter of interest. This time it will actually be a part of the grant application process. So as a part of that, we'll develop a risk assessment tool. That is a requirement under uniform guidance that we make sure that we tailor our monitoring to the risk brought by subrecipient. We're going to develop a scoring matrix, and then we're going to develop the Notice of Funding Opportunity document that gets released to the community and lets them know what they must provide in order to be eligible for an award. So some requirements in that will include some narrative, basically telling us what their financial status is. Pursuant to our uniform guidance, we also will require people to provide a federal employer identification number or social security number, a DUNS number, current registration with sam.gov. If they are a business, they must provide a letter that they're in good standing with the Secretary of State. If they're a nonprofit, they have to prove that they are registered to solicit for charitable contributions. And then there is a laundry list of things that they have to certify that they will do. And again, this is what is the bare minimum required under federal guidance. This is not a county decision to require this. So first, there must be no real or apparent conflict of interest, so they'll have to make any disclosures. They will have to take necessary affirmative steps to assure that minority and women's business enterprises and labor surplus area firms are used when possible. Provide a preference for the purchase, acquisition, or use of goods, products, or materials produced in the United States. Procure only items designated in the guidelines of the EPA to maximize energy and resource recovery. And perform a cost or price analysis and make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. So those are just some of the things that folks will have to make sure that they have and are able to do when they come to us for funding. So once we issue that notice of funding opportunity, we will have a webinar at the outset that we will expect anyone who wants to apply to go through so that they know what they're getting into before they even choose to spend time on the application. Once that application is open, we will provide some technical assistance to the folks who are making application to help them meet their requirements. And then we'll make sure that folks receive confirmation that their application has been submitted. Once the report portal is closed, we'll be communicating with those folks to let them know the status. We do have a grant panel included in the procedure. We have not yet established that. We, of course, will want feedback from the commission on who you want that grant panel to be. We will plan to come and talk to you one-on-one to kind of get your thoughts on priorities and grant panel and how you would prefer to see this process work so that we can put something together to present to you as a part of your ultimate approval process. So that grant panel will have a scoring matrix. They'll finalize the reviews. That will go through an internal review process before it comes to the commission for ultimate approval. So that moves us to the second phase then, which is award. So that will be presented to the commission, and then we will actually make sure that anyone who receives award is publicly announced, and we will put that on our website. We'll make it available everywhere so that we are very transparent with our process. We will, once people get an award, once you have approved it, we'll have about 2 weeks to get a copy of an agreement to them to get signed. And we will again have another webinar for those folks so they fully understand the monthly reporting requirements and everything that they're going to have to do, what documentation will suffice in order to receive their funds. So we will have an appeals process. That is the meeting we're going to have this afternoon to determine what level of appeal we are required to do. Again, at this point, we're trying to meet the minimum requirements under federal rules, unless the commission directs us to do more or do less. So then we move to post-award, which is basically implementation and oversight. It is a standard to have a grant management officer under the federal provisions. So we have a lot of language in this procedure about that person, and that they or their delegate will be responsible for ensuring compliance for all of the subrecipients. And again, this is something that's required under the federal rules. So basically, we will provide some technical assistance, but they will have seen webinars. We will have given them an agreement. They will have an understanding of what it is they are to produce. So we're hopeful that this will not be an arduous process. But folks will submit that information. If they do not comply with the reporting requirements, let's say they don't submit their information on time, or it's not comprehensive, not what they are supposed to provide, then there are a number of options that are outlined everywhere from suspending payment up to canceling the award if it is egregious and gets to that point. So it does say right now that we will apply robust internal controls and monitoring to ensure compliance. So that is what we're gearing up for. But again, we plan to offer technical assistance to help folks, and we plan to give them plenty of warning ahead of time regarding what they need to do. So we also learned in the final rule that a conflict of interest policy is necessary. It is a requirement. So we will be bringing that to you as well at some point. You will hear tomorrow that the final rule has significantly broadened eligibility. Very much so. Capital improvements are now something that can be considered. There's a lot more we can do with some of the internal needs we've heard about. You'll also hear about some large requests for funding from the community. And so at this time, we're talking about what a program would look like. But again, this will all be about whatever priorities the commission sets and how you all want to allocate funding. This isn't a guarantee that funding will be offered. So we just didn't, after you hear everything tomorrow, we didn't want to muddy the waters with the process. So are there any questions I can answer or any feedback
There
you'd
are
like
some
to share for now?
questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me start off real quick. You didn't ever mention navigators. Where do they fit into this?
So Navigator is a subrecipient for us. And so Brent has already basically worked with these folks. They've gone through the competitive process with the RFP. We have the agreement that's gone out to them. And now he is working with them on the reporting requirements. So they are an actual subrecipient who would be subject to the procedures that we've just outlined.
But they're going to help the people that are applying for these grants go through all these processes. Isn't that what the idea is?
I think and I can let Brent speak to this, but I think the idea is for them to connect to other resources, and then the county will provide technical assistance for county grant.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. That kind of is part of my question. Is there a way that we can see the allocations of the buckets that we already allocated? I mean, is there a way to pull up, or we're going to do that tomorrow probably?
Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about the total number available to our community, what is that?
A little north of 60 million that
Okay.
has been unallocated.
Okay, so we could allocate it all if we wanted to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, and what we will propose to you is that we would have a comprehensive funding plan the next time we come to you, although probably a contingency would be a portion of that.
Sure, okay. And then you mentioned that, so what is if someone has a pretty significant chunk of money that they're asking from us, and they get a portion from us, are they able to ask for other portions from state or city?
Absolutely. It would
Okay.
they would need to ensure that it's not duplicative.
Okay.
And that will be a responsibility we have as well.
Okay, so how will that be spelled out?
So in the webinar, we will speak to that if you have already received funding or are applying for funding for the same thing, then that would not be something you would want to seek county funding for. If it's unique from that, then they can apply. As a part of that risk assessment we described, that would be something that we would investigate. Hopefully they would share that with us. We could look at that, and then through our subrecipient monitoring process, we would have a part of the agreement that requires them to disclose if they receive other funding that could be potentially considered duplicative, so that we can make sure that it's not.
Okay, and so then when you talked about the possibility of, the word is escaping me, but like infrastructure, if we were talking about
Capital
the
improvements.
yes, thank you, the ComCare building, so things that we already have on the books, how are you going to explain how that might work and what we could potentially use this funding for?
Yes. Yes, and I think that, and then something that has come out through this final rule is the concept of revenue replacement. And what they are allowing is the presumption that you would have gained 5.2% of certain revenues, most of our revenues, in your revenue, and so per year. And so when we look at that, that's north of 10 million per year, and that funding can be used for traditional government services. And so that really expands some of the horizons. So yes, we will talk through that tomorrow, because I think I was surprised. I was very surprised at how broad this is.
Okay. And then one final question. You talked about risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk us through how we determine what our risk level is? There was a conversation we had about the state. They're a little bit riskier than we are. We are more risk averse than them. So how do we determine that? What is the appropriate way to determine a risk level? I think I'd like a little bit more information on that, if you might elaborate.
Sure. So and we can talk more tomorrow too, through the context of the final rule. But what we will want to do in assessing our level of risk is, I guess, what are the threats and what are the opportunities, right? If we are not fully compliant, we risk audit findings, not just from our auditors, but also from the OIG. This final rule is very clear and provides some lengthy detail about what happens if the OIG finds that you're not compliant. Everything from if you're intentionally being non-compliant, that there may be some recoupment measures that they take, up to they may try and, if it just appears to be, a difference in interpretation of eligibility, that they may work with us to try and maybe find something else that would be eligible to swap expenses for, potentially still a finding. And then depending on the level of finding and the level of issue, there are other triggers that we've talked through before, potential credit rating risk, potential high risk. We receive a high risk designation as a grantee. And so there may be some additional compliance requirements on us. It may make it harder for us to get some funding through a competitive process, some of those things. And so in determining the level of risk, we just need to figure out how risky we want to be, what thresholds we're comfortable with. If it's up to, a $5 million repayment, then maybe we have a percentage that we look at. But what we have certified is that we will follow all the uniform guidance and all the terms. So then it just becomes a matter of how strict we are with our subrecipient monitoring as to that's really where the risk comes into play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just kind of concerned with Whit O'Brien and the folks working with Whit O'Brien and the consultants that have differing opinions about risk tolerance and being able to do the things that will really move our community forward with this historic funding that's here. And so I just want to make sure that we're given all of the information from these consultants that we're paying a pretty penny to have help us. And I'm just concerned that we have consultants who have differing opinions. And so how do we get on the same page? How do our consultants get on the same page so that we're all hearing the same guidance? So I guess that's a concern of mine that I want to make sure that we address. So we're not sort of scared in thinking that we can't do something because of auditing or because of credit ratings and those kinds of things. So I hope that we can really dive into that and get a one opinion from our consultant firm.
Well, and I share your concerns, absolutely. I have had the opportunity to speak with Whit, senior leadership, and I feel good about where we are today. My concerns have been allayed. Like I said, the final rule is much broader. Before, when we were acting under an interim rule, it was we didn't really know the rules of the game and we didn't know what was going to happen down the road. And so I think that's where some of that fear or trepidation came from. I think with what we're seeing today, there's a lot less risk of that just by virtue of the final rule. But your concern is noted, and we'll make sure that that doesn't happen.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Lindsay.
Commissioner Howell?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being an expert on this topic. I'm impressed that you've read that twice. And
I haven't.
It's well.
Only once. He fibbed.
Tom said you did, so I assumed it was correct. But anyway, I am impressed. I know it's a lot of work. It's complicated, and I appreciate you being thoughtful and doing your very best to keep us on the right path here. I do have a couple of questions, though. Thank you for the presentation so far. On the letter of interest, I know that this is probably the most interesting item on the schedule, because that's essentially when the community gets a chance to know that they can begin to respond to the call. I know you can't give us a date. I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking for you to spitball about when you think that might happen.
Well, Brent will share with you the results of the letter of interest tomorrow.
Okay.
We already had it posted for 4 weeks. Got more than 200 responses. I'm not going to tell you the total dollar ask because I want him to have the glory tomorrow, but it's significant.
But that window remains open because it is still open. Is that correct?
The ongoing needs survey is still open. The letter of interest actually closed about a week and a half ago.
Okay. So if someone in the community has not responded thus far, is there still opportunity for them to respond?
Not necessarily through the letter of interest, but the letter of interest is not an application. It's just helping us gauge the priorities and the needs in the community.
Okay.
They can still apply.
So every one of these requests for help, if you will, they have to have some type of COVID connection. In other words, there has to be an element, there's a recovery component of what they're dealing with. They're asking for help. because of some detrimental impact of COVID on their organization. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You mentioned there's going to be two interactive webinars. Mm-hmm. And interactive, so people can sign on and ask questions
Absolutely.
and be fully involved. Is there going to be any type of non-interactive videos that they can review on their own leisure and actually have access to those?
So all of the webinars will be recorded. There also will be frequently asked question documents that are posted after the webinar and continuously as questions come in so that people can see it, so that everybody gets the exact same answer.
Very good. Now we're in 2022. I understand that the second $50 million is in the
June
mail, I
1st.
guess. What's that?
June 1st.
June 1st. Are we moving forward as if we have all $100 million to process through? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll say once again, I don't know, I know that county needs, I guess, need to come, I think we come first, essentially. Anything we need is funded first through those dollars, and then whatever monies are still available after that is what we're offering to community organizations, that type of thing. I'll say once again, I'm very concerned about the issue of ongoing testing support. I think that, I don't know where we are with that. I continue to have concern. I know the state continues to talk about, ending support to the community here. I'm very concerned that is still a threat. And I guess I want to just make sure that we fully fund whatever our testing needs are in the community, that continues to be our priority. How do we reserve enough funding for that, knowing that we have an ongoing testing need?
I think that's part of the discussion tomorrow, Commissioner, as we begin to lay the land on this. I do agree we have to watch what the state does with testing and what their funding going forward will look like as well. I know that there's been mention of a reduction of funding or an extinguishment of funding by March of this year, and we know that it's not going to be over in March, and it's going to stretch into the future. I think that, and Lindsay has already mentioned a component of contingency that we set aside for unknowns. These dollars were originally scheduled to go for recovery, and we're clearly not in recovery yet. We're still in operations yet. So I think that as you consider creating these new buckets, that there is a thought of contingency for exactly that kind of need.
Are we fairly sure that we can use these funds for local support for local testing costs and things like that?
Absolutely.
I
And
would
we'll
like to
talk about that tomorrow.
Go ahead. I would like to estimate maybe a little on the conservative side, like a little high perhaps, what we think that dollar might be, assuming that the state completely backs out. How much of this money do we need for local testing support, and have that money earmarked and set aside on the front end so that we don't have a question going forward that we have support for testing?
We looked, when KDHE put out before Christmas that they were going to stop testing, we began to compute that, and I think, Tim and I'd want to talk about that, but something just a little less than $1 million a month to continue full board testing for the community at the level that we have been providing it. We'll put some numbers to that, Commissioner, and get you a better number on what that would look like going forward.
All right, and then I guess I have, so we do anticipate we'll have more requests than we have money. There's going to be.
Yes, without a doubt.
So with that in mind, I just want to give you an example. I was trying to understand how this might be used. So if you have a nonprofit organization that had a capital campaign and started some type of capital improvement project, but because of the price of labor and the price of materials has skyrocketed during this time, they might be eligible, if they would apply for it, they might be eligible under what you described this morning to get some capital support for their project potentially.
Potentially, yes, but they would have to follow all of those same federal requirements that we would have to as recipients of the funds.
All right, that's all my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Howell brought up the testing thing, and you won't be able to answer any of these questions, but possibly Tim can.
Okay.
What I'm concerned with is our testing as we're going forward, and a couple things. First of all, the federal government is providing millions and millions of at-home tests right now. In addition, I've seen that our testing at our locations is kind of dropping off. We post on our website every single day how many tests we've given and what the positivity rate is. But I have little faith in the accuracy of those numbers. Well, let me back up. The numbers are very accurate based on what we're doing. But I don't think that they're accurate on what the positivity rate is or what the testing rate is in this entire United States. I don't know what the solution is on what we can do as we're moving forward, because this positivity rate is something that we're very interested in, because once we see the positivity rate going up, then we see a change in the hospitalization. When we see it going down, we see a decrease in the hospitalization. I know that Commissioner Lopez and I asked to take a look at some of the wastewater treatment testing. So I don't know if maybe that's not a better way of moving forward on seeing what kind of testing we can get. And I don't even know if WSU can test that. So that's another question that I've got. So is that a possibility for us to start moving forward with wastewater treatment to get a better understanding of what the real true positivity rate is in Sedgwick County?
I'll take a swing at some of that. Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Coffin, Deputy County Manager. One of the issues I think that you're referring to is the fact that we've got a lot of at-home testing going on now, and KDHE is in the process of rolling out a tool to allow people to report those results as well, because there isn't a good mechanism right now to make that happen. But again, that's voluntary compliance for people that are doing some voluntary in-home testing, so I don't know that would get us much closer to the true answer that you're looking for or not. Again, that conversation with the hospitals yesterday was interesting. That they kind of described that as an additional data point that may have some value. I think the biggest struggle is there are so many variables in terms of that positivity rate right now that the only thing that we could continue to do to help in this pandemic is encourage vaccination. We're still just at 50, just over 50% in the community to be vaccinated. Our booster rate is around 22% right now, which is really low given the great benefit that the booster has against the Omicron variant. So we still have to plead with the community to get vaccinated. In terms of finding out information about the positivity rate, I know the city of Wichita may have capacity. As we heard yesterday, one of the challenges is making sure that you get appropriate sample sizes as you're testing that wastewater and making sure that you get a true representative of the community. I'm not sure how quickly the city could ramp something like that up, and then who could help us analyze that data, because that's really the key, is once you've got that data, analyzing it and being able to generalize it across the entire community when we know what the answer is, and the answer is for people to get vaccinated.
Okay. Well, as far as self-reporting, we saw when we were trying to do contact tracing that the public is not going to respond. So I don't have a whole lot of faith in self-reporting on having any kind of accuracy. What I think we really need, as we're talking about ARPA funding, is what does it cost us to start doing wastewater treatment testing? And who can accomplish that to turn it around in a timely manner so that we can get a better grasp of what the true positivity rate is in Sedgwick County. So we're talking about funding, and it's going to take funding in order to be able to do this.
I think one thing we can do if the commission, if the body wants to move forward, as Lindsay has pointed out, this is all competitive process anyway, to put out an RFP to begin to answer those types of questions, and to get a lay of the land on how long it would take, how much it would cost, how effective it would be. We could start that process now and not necessarily have to commit to doing it. If the RFP does not yield a tangible, realistic, beneficial type of solution, we could walk away from it. But if the commission wants us to explore that, we can have staff begin that process now on putting out a request.
Very good. One more point on testing. What I learned over the weekend is that the MDL, which we're very blessed to have the MDL here in Sedgwick County, but the MDL closes down at 11 o'clock on Saturday. So anyone getting a test Saturday, and it's closed all day Sunday, so the soonest that they're going to get results from the MDL is about 48 hours. And we've always been saying that that's way too long. So it seems to me the solution is we have a couple Panther machines in the health department. If we could rearrange the schedules of the folks that are doing running those Panther machines in the health department so that we can cover that gap when the MDL is closed, so that there's not a 48-hour delay on getting testing back results for the community. So what's the option? What's the chance of something like that happening?
We're struggling with staffing in our lab just like every other part of the organization, and we have started conversations about whether or not we can shift some of the schedules for the staff that we do have available to pick up some of that weekend testing. What we've discovered, now the other thing to consider is that we've been very fortunate to have the National Guard in town for a couple of weekends, but they will be gone after this Friday, so we won't be able to staff sampling to the level that we have in the past. We'll see if we can continue to support some weekend sampling, but those two things go hand in hand. But we are evaluating both our sampling capacity and our lab capacity for weekend testing as well.
Okay, but what you've already said, we're not getting anybody into the old library right now. How long are we going to continue that if we need those folks to be able to do the sampling and the testing?
We are in the process of changing. We'll have an announcement coming out later this week. We're going to modify the hours of the sampling site on South Main beginning as early as next week. Some of those folks can be repurposed to do work, sampling, for example, registration, things like that. They're not lab techs, and so that's one of the real challenges that we've had is hiring lab techs to do that lab work. But we continue to pursue those, and so as I said, we're looking at the staff that we have available and how we can make them most responsive to the community in terms of scheduling.
Okay. Well, I understand that the National Guard's doing a great job. I appreciate that. I understand that they're going to be leaving. But if they're taking samples and we can't test them for 48 hours, I think we're kind of spinning our wheels. So we need to make sure that we're able to test those samples.
Well, right now, WSU did add a Saturday morning pickup, so samples that were collected early in the morning on Saturdays were being tested, and results were usually getting out either that same day or the next day. Samples that were collected after about 11 o'clock on Saturday then get run first thing for, Monday morning, and so they're available generally sometime Monday afternoon usually.
But again, that's 48 hours from the time that sampling took place until we're getting results back. And that's what we've been saying all along. 48 hours is too long for us to be able to tell people whether they're positive or not. We need to get that number back down to where it was.
Well, we're doing everything that we can to get results as fast as we can.
Yeah, I would add in, Chairman, actually, upon discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, MDL has never been open on Sunday. Did we not discover? They've never.
No, they have never been open on Sundays, no.
So it's a question of whether we shore up, but I thought that they did something different out there. I thought all of a sudden they decided to stop operations on Sunday, but as we communicated with them, they have not been testing on, or they have not been processing tests on Sunday. So this is something that has been status quo. I don't disagree that we need to change status quo on this and see if we can do something better. We'll do the best we can with staffing.
That's correct. The one change that's happened is that they've added that Saturday morning lab pickup, and so they are running for this brief period of time while we had Saturday sampling going on, some Saturday lab work as well.
Okay. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're not doing sampling on Sunday in our facility, are we?
We are with National Guard staff, but
National
this last Sunday would be unless we can figure out a way to use existing staff to extend that.
The vast majority of testing that's being done in the community at businesses and nonprofits around the community are happening Monday through Friday. A lot of those places are essentially also shut down on Saturday. So I think the number of samples being delivered to the MDL on Saturday is pretty low compared to Monday through Friday. We still have private sector testing options, CVS pharmacy, for example, or whatever, or MedExpress. They still do some testing in the private sector later on Saturday and on Sunday. the government that sent out those, or sending out those tests, those are antigen tests. That does meet part of the community's need for testing, but it's not the best test. Our PCR test is obviously better, but someone could use an antigen test, on the weekend or whatever. But my concern is that some household, I guess it's limited to 4 of those antigen tests per household. So if you have a household with lots of people, they still get 4, or you have a household with one person, they still get 4. And I think that in some cases it meets the need, but many cases it does not meet the need. But also we've been fairly consistent. As Dr. Menz has talked to this board, they've been fairly negative on antigen testing as being a good decision maker for whether you have a reason to go out and be in public or not. We've kind of said that the results are not that accurate. So, although it is helpful to some degree, it's really not the same as a PCR. But they're good on an individual level. I know some people in the community that have avoided PCR testing because of the contact tracing, or because of forced consequences upon them. They would like to know, but they don't want to have to deal with consequences of losing control of their own schedule, so to speak, or have to deal with contact tracing. So I know some people who I'm pretty sure they seemed like they probably were positive based on symptoms, but they chose not to get tested. So I think our numbers actually have been wrong for a while. With respect to the wastewater testing, I think it's good for us to track trend lines going better or worse in the community, but I'm not so sure it's that valuable I think it's been inaccurate for a while. That's my point. I think there's been a lot of COVID infection in the community that actually has been missed for quite a long time, even before these tests from the government have been sent out. So I think the biggest value of our PCR testing is so someone on an individual level can make a best choice whether or not they are whether they should quarantine or isolate, or whether they are able to go out in public or go to work and that type of thing. So I think that the PCR is, the rapid PCR is certainly, it's the most important thing we do, I think. I've dropped off tests. I'm still doing COVID testing. I've dropped off tests at the MDL on Saturday right before 11 o'clock, and those results are still posted that day. So as long as they get them in their hands before 11 o'clock, I think it's their intent to post those that day, generally. Maybe they're not promising, I suppose, but that's been their practice. And I've seen that happen lately. And with respect to Sunday, I don't know how many they would even get in on a Sunday. I mean, if they were open and doing that, I don't know right now what the number of samples they would get in there to process on Sunday. I don't know if we can find that way to analyze that, but I mean, maybe one of the things we could do is encourage them to open up a Sunday service. That might be the easiest way to solve that, but I just don't know how much they would actually do on a Sunday. If we can, I don't know if there's a way to figure that out. I think right now that the going through Saturday at 11 o'clock has probably met most of the need, because I don't think they're getting that many samples in on Saturday anyway. All right, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Cruz, or Commissioner Lopez, sorry.
Can we see what the National Guard is doing and averaging on Saturdays and Sundays from the past couple of weeks?
I'll send that information out to you. My recollection from looking at the data yesterday was that we did a couple hundred per day on the first weekend, and this last weekend we were about half of that. But for whatever reason, and I can't explain it, the interest and the demand for testing just really dropped off last week. It had peaked a couple of weeks before, much less demand for testing at our sites. And I don't know about the community, but a significant drop off this last weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I know that the federal government's supposed to be sending out a whole lot of antigen tests. They have some value. They're not near as accurate as PCR tests. On the very first day that they were available to order, for my own information, I ordered the tests. I have yet to receive them. I know I talked to Commissioner Lopez. She did the same thing, and she has received hers. But I don't know when we're going to get these distributed throughout the community. But again, they're antigen tests. They're not PCR tests. They're not near as accurate. I have a granddaughter that goes to K-State. She was in close contact. They wouldn't let her back in class until she had a PCR test that said that she was negative. So the antigens give some kind of information, but we still have to have those PCR tests available for the community. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Tim. And Lindsay, did you have anything else you wanted to add for yours? Oh, very good. Mr. Manager.
We'll go to the discussion on admin building, and Tanya will lead that discussion.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Tanya Cole, Assistant County Manager.
Morning, Tanya.
How are you today?
Good.
Okay. Back in December, if you recall, Justin Graham with SJCF and I presented to you on the County Administration Building, and I've got that PowerPoint if we need to resort back to that. But since that time, I have put together a summary sheet of the options that we discussed at that time. There were 5 options that we discussed on a new county admin building, new construction. And we also, at that time, discussed doing, if we were to put out an RFP for looking at existing buildings. So I've put a summary sheet together on that, and if you see, and I hope you have a copy of that as well. So this is looking at those options, and if you don't mind, I'll just kind of go through that briefly and then allow you to have discussion. So the first option there is to demo the annex, and the cost there is just a little bit over $27 million. And from the point of making that decision, we're looking at about 35 months to do that, and that is construction and to move in, so a total of 35 months. Then we have option 1A, and that would be to keep the annex and do that bridge over the annex. That is $25.9 million, and total for construction and move-in would be 35 months. We had option 2, that was to close Elm Street. That is $24.6 million. Total there, timeline is 36 months. We had option 3, that was north of the jail, $26.4 million, and that will be 35 months total with construction move-in. We had third and main option, that is $31.9 million, so almost $32 million. That would take a total of 35 months. And then if we were to do an existing building search, that would take about 32 months for construction and move-in. And then if you are to add, to do the RFP, we're looking at about another 1.5 months there. So in total, 33.5 months. Now the costs I'm giving you is just for construction only. So we want to add another $6 million there for A&E, which is architectural and engineering costs, FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and then project contingency as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions and then allow you, of course, to have your discussion.
Thank you. A question for Tanya? Well, the bottom line is, if you look at your spreadsheet, we're going to have all of our admin functions disrupted for a minimum of 35 to 36 months. We're going to be living in temporary facilities that hopefully be adequate, but they're not ideal. We've been talking about this now for 5 years that I've been on the commission, and right now we have some unique opportunities. Lindsay just briefed us that there's a possibility that we can use some of the ARPA money to move over for some kind of replacement of funds from the counties that we may be able to use for admin building, for ComCare, or a combination of both of those. I think it's time for us to make a decision rather than sitting here saying that we've got a decision to make but not making a decision. So I would like to see this put on agenda so that we can discuss it at a formal meeting and take a formal vote on what kind of direction that we need to take in the future. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question for Manager. Can you remind me about when it was that we changed the PBC, the funding requirements for the 3-block radius? When did that issue change?
Mike, too,
There's
on
Lindsay
that.
behind you. I didn't know if she was here, so I apologize.
Oh, go ahead, Lindsay. Yeah, go ahead, Lindsay.
The commission approved that at the end of 2020, and it went into effect, I think, in December of 2020. And so that allows debt issuances for county facilities to be general obligation.
It just seems to me, I guess anecdotally, it seems like there was a reluctance to go outside the 3-block area because of the previous rule. And I'm not sure how serious we have been looking for other spaces since that rule change. And I feel like we haven't I know we've got some great options here, but in terms of due diligence, it seems like since that rule change, we've not actually gone out there and looked at options. There's a couple of options shown in the back pages here, but it seems like we've not really looked recently since that rule change. And I just want to, as we make a decision, it'd be nice to kind of be refreshed. What is out there? Are we missing opportunities? Because it seems like that rule change significantly changes the calculus on this decision.
I'd recommend, commissioners, if we're going to look at option 5, which is the existing building search, that we would definitely want to refresh that. We have not done anything active on that for, Tanya, 2-3 years.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. I guess if we do go for an existing building search, how is it going to take us less time?
Because the construction, because we're remodeling instead of building new.
Okay, okay. All right, but there's no guarantee that, we've been dealing with this for 5 years, so looking again at everything that could be, I wonder how much time that would push us out.
Well, as we discussed it, to do an RFP, we're estimating about 4 to 6 weeks. To do that, we would evaluate, but we're estimating for construction of that building around 12 to 18 months to do construction of a remodel.
Okay, so when we talk efficiency of functions of our government, will we address that again as well? I think that was one good thing of having proximity to the courthouse, proximity to historic, and those were elements that we took into consideration as to why we would keep a complex rather than searching outside.
Absolutely. Are you saying that if we were to do a search and bring those buildings back, is that what you're asking in comparison to?
So we're moving all of the administration functions out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Would we be considering, where's elections going to go? We haven't even tackled that. Where's elections going to go? Where would HR go? Are we going to be considering all of that? I feel like we're going to open ourselves up to a lot of other additional questions. And I guess those questions need to be answered, so we might as well talk about them. But
yeah, if you're talking about what departments will be going into this admin building, I can certainly address that. Yeah. Do you want me to address that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're talking about for a county admin building, the departments that would go into this would be the county clerk, the county commissioners, the county counselor's office, county manager and communications, facilities, finance, human resources, records management, register of deeds, county treasurer. We would have a lobby, courthouse, police screening, and a cafe. And then currently, just to answer your questions on elections, we are currently looking for a building for elections right now that would have their administrative office and then their warehouse space collectively in one building.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Meitzner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of echo what Commissioner Howell articulated earlier, that the unknown factor on number 5 does not sit well with me to make a decision on either going with 1, 2, 3, or 4 yet. So I'm supportive of refreshing, as was the words that Tom said. There's a lot of buildings that I think downtown and outside the 3-mile radius or the 3-block radius is different than it was just a few years ago. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopez?
I would just point out that going forward, we're seeing a lot of large governments, large areas that are unifying their governments between city and county. So I do have some concern going too far out because I don't want to put this much money into a new admin building and then that really prohibits what, the next generation of commissioners is able to accomplish with the collaboration between the city and county. So I do think it's really important to keep that in mind, to keep this close just because of that reason. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. So just, I guess, 2 points. One of the buildings that's shown here is actually significantly less money, and it's in the downtown footprint. And I think when we talked about that building earlier, there was some concerns about security of nearby street. And I feel like there's a question that never has been answered. So I'm just curious if that's still a concern or not. I just don't know about that. But there's one option that I think, I've walked through the building, I toured the building, I guess, with staff one time to take a look and see. It seemed like it was a reasonably good option, and it's a lot less money. But the concern there seemed like it was discounted because of a security concern. I just throw that out there again. I'd like to have that reviewed. But as we vacate the courthouse here with all these various agencies here, the DA I don't think they don't have plans of using the 24,000 square foot DA annex we're currently being used. They're not going to be using that at that point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So right now, we don't have a use for that 24,000 square feet. I'm sure we'll find a use, but I don't know what that's going to be. And I know as the election office moves out of the historic at some point, do we have a plan to use that space in some way?
Well, let me address in these scenarios, if we are to remodel the annex, which is option 1A, we would utilize the annex as part of the county admin building.
I understand, but this also includes a construction project to build other parts of the building, which is much larger than the 24,000 square feet. I'm suggesting that let's say we look, I know it's nice to have synergy between these agencies, but let's say some of the agencies were across the street in the historic. Some of them moved into the 24,000 square foot of remodeled DA annex space. So they're no longer actually in the same facility, but they're across the street from each other. And I think, if I understand correctly, some of the things in Munger, I think, are also planning to move back to the courthouse once we vacate our 5 floors here. So I guess my point is we have 24,000 square feet. I don't think we have a plan for it yet. I'm not sure we have a plan for Munger. I don't think we have a plan for the historic courthouse. And I'm just curious, if we were to say they're all nearby, how much of this long list of agency space needs can be met at the DA annex, the Munger, and across the street? How much do we actually have to have that's not being met in one of those 3 locations? I don't think we have a plan for those 3. I don't know what's going to happen to those 3 things once we move out of the courthouse, remodel the courthouse, and everything moves in here. Then we have unutilized county-owned facility space. I don't know what we're going to do with those things. And at the same time, we're talking about building the admin building, a very large building, and I don't think we actually have a plan for these other 3 spaces. So I'm just curious. There should be some coordination or some thought to how we're going to use those spaces as we're making this decision.
Commissioner, I might just address, as we start to look at space that is not utilized, the first thing that I always do is look at our leases and what we can do to come out of current leases that we're spending money on. And I would look at, okay, what space do we have and what space can we move in that we currently have facility, that we own facilities. So that would be the first thing I would look at is what do we have for leases? What space do we have that we could utilize and put a lease into?
If I was going to problem solve this, I would say, let's think ahead a little bit and say, we think we use those 3 spaces this way. Let's have some type of discussion and a plan of what that would be. And let's find out, do we still have a need for a 80,000 square foot building or 100,000 square foot building somewhere to house all these agencies? And if we still have the same need, then I would start looking and say, what are the buildings around us or around the community one of which I think is a fairly reasonably good idea. It's a block or 2 from here. It's not very far, and it's a lot less money. To me, that would be something I don't want to understand that one before we go on and approve, if you will, $26, $27, $28 million or $30 million construction project. I'm just not ready to vote on that until I understand the things that kind of leads us in that direction. I know we spent 5 years talking about this, but the reason we take all this time is because we've not actually logically gone down this path to an end point. We keep talking about it. We end up getting diverted or distracted or something else. We've done some great work, but I'm not ready to vote on a $30 million project when I don't know that we actually have a need for that large of a building. And I'm not sure we actually have we don't have a building that's nearby that we couldn't actually utilize, and it'd be a lot less money. So I appreciate this going on the agenda, but if we have to vote today, I would have to vote no, because I feel like we've not done a logical path to get us to that point. We've missed some steps, and I'm not ready to vote on that yet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Tanya. I don't see any other questions. Sure. Mr. Manager, what do we got next?
Mike wants to talk us through the state legislative protocol.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mike Boone County Councilor. When Tom and I and Tanya were talking a little bit about reacting to legislation in Topeka the other day, we thought it might be useful to come before the board and talk a little bit about protocols for the county commissioners, protocols for county staff, and address things like, do we need some policies to address some of these issues? We've talked a little bit about this with our lobbyist, Jason Watkins, as well. Things happen very quickly in Topeka. Bills come out every day. The calendar comes out on Thursday mornings, which isn't really conducive to our calendar and meetings. Because we have our meetings on a Wednesday, Thursday morning, the calendar for next week will come out. Many times there are hearings on a Monday or Tuesday before our next meeting, or even Wednesday of that week. So we have difficulty knowing how we can react to these bills, decide whether to submit testimony, decide whether to testify in favor or against particular bills under the format that we have right now. We have county commissioners that have already, Commissioner Howell, who has a great deal of experience in the legislature, has already testified in Topeka this year. We need to talk about when commissioners should be testifying as a citizen on their own, or testifying and making sure that they're not testifying on behalf of the board unless this board takes a position on a particular bill and decides who should be submitting testimony and who should be perhaps testifying in favor of bills. So, and with regard to a lot of bills that come out may affect a department, may affect 911 adversely, may affect planning adversely, or some department. I think the county manager needs to have the opportunity to let his department heads testify against a bill or submit testimony without getting official county commission approval on that sort of process, so long as we provide the commission with notice that this is happening. And anyway, that's what I was wanting to, I think all of us were wanting to talk to you about and see if you think we need a policy change or need a policy, not a policy change. See if we need a meetings change. There's some discussion yesterday about moving staff meetings to Friday, which would then allow us to look at the bills during the week, look at the calendar that comes out on Thursday morning, and maybe make some decisions as a commission on Friday morning to address some of these bills. So just throwing that out for discussion. I didn't know if commissioners had any thoughts on any of this.
Thank you. Commissioner Meitzner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, you make a good point. That's an awkward situation. So the calendar comes out on Thursdays, and because I was sitting there thinking, well, what's our solution? Because we have individuals that could testify, we have department heads, we collectively could take a position, but that takes an open meeting or a special meeting. So maybe during at least I like what you're saying, at least during the legislative session, that we change our staff meetings to Friday mornings so we can, because it changes fast, and we can, that way if we need to take a position, we can, I guess, could we call a vote on a staff meeting on a Friday? Could we determine if we need to have a special meeting then an hour later to take a position? I don't know what the answer is, but I think a Friday staff meeting, at least at the minimal, is a good step forward.
we typically don't take official action on during a staff meeting, or we'd have the county clerk's presence in the room. But that doesn't mean that it isn't an open meeting, and it doesn't mean that staff can't or the commissioners can't gather from what a majority of commissioners think on how to proceed for the next week. So,
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. So even though that's true about the calendar comes out on Thursdays for the following week, those are hearings that are planned a week in advance, but there's not even a requirement for that. They can schedule a hearing 48 hours out, and sometimes they even break that rule. There's been times they've scheduled a hearing for tomorrow, and to testify on that bill, you actually have to submit testimony 24 hours prior to the hearing, which isn't even possible because they just scheduled it for tomorrow. Some of these committees meet daily, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They might just say, we're going to have a hearing tomorrow, and that happens. So I think there's a normal process, but there's also the reality, the practice of the legislature is they don't necessarily give people much notice, and that's just the nature of the legislature. Rather than being critical to that, we just need to understand how that works. There's a culture there, and we need to basically be flexible to what they do there. And I think the reality is, I think we can meet on Fridays for things that are planning to happen next week, but in order for us to testify, let's say there's a hearing on Monday morning, we actually have to submit testimony 24 hours prior to that, which again would be Friday morning. If they have a Monday morning hearing, it's due Friday morning. And in order to, and just make sure everybody understands, that for you to testify on a piece of legislation, you must submit testimony. You can do written testimony in favor of or as an opponent, a proponent, or neutral, but you're not allowed to testify unless you submit written testimony. And so that testimony needs to be written by someone, and we probably need to take a look at it as a commission, if we want to, if you will, have that presented as a majority of this commission, and present that to the legislature as the BOCC has provided this testimony. I think that, so even if we meet on Fridays, my point is this, it doesn't necessarily do all the things you're asking it to do. So just a couple of thoughts. I know for a fact that we as a governing board can meet by Zoom, for example. As long as the media is allowed to participate, the public's allowed to participate, as an observer, we're allowed to meet by Zoom or by phone, for example. I think we could call meetings much more often and develop a consensus, not call to order, not vote, but we're allowed to legally meet in person or by in a virtual format, whether by Zoom or by phone. If something is that urgent, I don't know why we couldn't meet on any day potentially, so that we can submit testimony from the BOCC. And I think that's the right thing. If we don't have that opportunity to actually talk amongst each other, then I think it has to come from an individual commissioner. I have no problem with any commissioner speaking as an individual commissioner, as long as they say, I'm testifying as a single commissioner. I don't represent the views of my board necessarily. They may or may not agree with what I'm telling you, but I'm speaking to you as a single commissioner. As long as you preface it with that statement, I don't have a problem with any commissioner ever testifying on any issue in any regard that they like. I would just say this also. This is just a frustration of mine. I testified last week, as you all know. I listened to conferee after conferee after conferee who read their testimony, and if you look at the body language of the legislators, they lose interest very quickly. When you read your testimony that you've already given if you give them written testimony and you read your testimony as you testify, in other words, it's the same thing that you already gave to them, you're not going to retain their attention. It's just the way it works. The culture of legislative hearings is that if you watch lobbyists, they're very good at what they do. They never read their testimony. They become subject matter experts on the thing they're talking about. As a subject matter expert, they speak from their heart. They can answer questions because they're very familiar with the bill language, and they know what they're testifying for or against, and they can answer questions from their heart. They don't need to actually read their testimony. So it's just a stylistic thing, but it does really matter. If you want to be effective in the legislature, you have to speak from the heart as a subject matter expert. I just want to just share that because it's frustrating to legislators and it's frustrating to me to sit there and watch that happen conferee after conferee after conferee. And so if we want to be effective in our efforts in Topeka, there is a right way and there's a wrong way. And I want to be effective. I'd also say that general orders, which is, again, any bills that come above the line for general orders, is decided usually around 5 o'clock the day before the session. So you talk about the calendar. The calendar actually is published in the evening as they leave the Capitol. The details of that calendar printing is decided late in the evening, and they actually go to print overnight. And you cannot get an accurate calendar until generally very late in the evening to find out what's actually going to be debated tomorrow on general orders. And if you look for what's called the line at the House or the Senate, it's above the line. We have opportunities to continue to lobby our legislative friends on general orders by calling them and texting them and emailing them as that bill moves through the legislature. We need to babysit that piece of legislation through the entire process. And sometimes these provisions change bill numbers, which is why I use CanFocus. I think we still have a CanFocus account. If anybody's not using CanFocus, then they don't know how to track legislation as it changes bill numbers through the process. And so the reality is, I think we need to be basically babysit the bill. And every time it moves anywhere, we need to know what's going on. I'll tell you right now, there are bills in the legislature today where I've called the chairman of that committee and begged them for a hearing because I know that's important to Sedgwick County. And they will not necessarily schedule a hearing if they don't have anybody that shows interest in it. The bill that I testified on last week was not going to have a hearing until I called the chairman and asked him for a hearing. And as it turned out, there was about, 10 or 15 people who testified on that bill, proponents and opponents and a neutral. In fact, we ran out of time. We ran over. The hearing lasted 15 minutes past the time they were supposed to end. And I guess the final thing I would just say this is that all these policy bills, they are not important to the legislature in the fact they're only there for budget and tax. We can talk about policy in Topeka, but bear in mind, this is parallel to why they're really there, which is just for budget and tax. And these policy bills, they will give them a time to the extent that they have time, but the legislative process moves so quickly. If you want to move a policy bill forward, like right now, I don't know what the date of turnaround is. You know what the turnaround date is, Mike? It's about 2 or 3 weeks ahead. It's not very far. So it's usually around middle of February is turnaround, which means if you don't have your provisions, if you don't have them in bill form, have them introduced to a committee, have a hearing, have that bill worked by committee, passed out on general orders and on final action in the first House, whichever that is, House or Senate, that bill is going to be basically not going to move forward that session. In other words, we have until about the middle of February. Today's February 1st. We've got literally 2.5 weeks or so before we actually will hit that turnaround date. If you want to pass any legislation this year, that's how you've got to move it forward. You have to keep track of that turnaround date. And we're almost at that point already. So I have legislative things I want to get done this year. I can't sit back and let someone else carry the water. I've got to push from my perspective as a commissioner to lobby those things at the receptions, at the over the phone, and by being in Topeka and testifying in every way I possibly can. There's a right way to get this done, which is why I think Sedgwick County has actually been very effective at passing legislation, because I think our lobbyist is actually very good at this. He knows what it's like to be a legislator because he was one. We are exceptional in terms of Sedgwick County's success rate in getting legislation passed. We've done very, very well as an organization. Most organizations don't pass anything ever because they don't understand the process. And so I want to be smart, and I just want to share all that. I probably said too much, but I just want us to be effective in our efforts. That's all I want to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, if we need to change our date, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I will say this, though. I mean, we know what our priority issues are. Where are we doing, how are we being proactive when these things do come up? Where is the testimony? I mean, we should be planning to we should be planning to testify. And so who would do that? I mean, I don't know why we have to wait until these things come up on a calendar. I mean, we know what we are advocating for. Why don't we already have these ready? And that way we don't have to be, reactive. We know that we want to strengthen and enhance the Medicaid safety net. We know that we want to address behavioral health needs. We know that we want to support the Community Crisis Center funding. Like, why aren't we already having all of those testimonies written out and agreed upon that this is what we're going to say for all of these issues. That would be, that way we don't have to fly by the seat of our pants when things come up. It's all ready beforehand. So I guess I would ask who would be responsible for writing this testimony? How would we determine which commissioner speaks on this? Is this, whoever wants to do it? Because I would like to go speak on a lot of these things and plan to. And so, as Commissioner Howe has stated, I will do it as a citizen. But I think it's important, since we have all agreed on this platform, that we don't wait until it comes up. We should already have it ready. And so that would be my request, that we work on it now and talk about it beforehand so that we're not scrambling at the last minute.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lopez and I, along with Mike and manager and Tanya, were on a conference call yesterday with Jason and Jessica, and they kind of put this idea before us that we're talking about today. That's why we're discussing it, because just as Commissioner Cruz said, if we have a meeting on Friday, we've got the agenda out there. It may or may not be complete, but at the same time, we can say, hey, this is going to be something that we need to testify in next week, and we, having a staff meeting, can decide which one of the commissioners or more than one goes up to Topeka to speak on that. So I kind of like the idea of going to a Friday staff meeting so that we can talk about it in an open meeting, and we can decide who's going to go up, and we can, instead of reacting as we are now, it gives us a better chance of planning. So that's where the idea came from. Commissioner Meitzner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm okay Friday, but I really appreciate what Commissioner Howell has said. And I think, Mike, what you're referring to is these last minute things that pop up. A Zoom availability is, sometimes staff meetings are, you have a thing you need to cover in the staff. And if we have just a political emergency, a staff meeting could be, like today's is a few hours, versus a political agenda item might just warrant more of an emergency Zoom meeting. So I stand. I'm in favor either way. But I do appreciate what Commissioner Howe was talking about, and you, Mike, about these. It's really more these last minute things. Some of our agenda, we don't even know if it's in a committee yet. So we're prepared. We can be prepared to talk on our agenda, but some of it hadn't even come in front of a committee yet. So that's just my comment. So thank you, and thanks for bringing this to our attention. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as an observation, if we do get together, whether it be through Zoom or a phone call or even in person, face-to-face, if we're going to get together specifically to talk about a legislative position and, if you will, commission someone to speak on behalf of the BOCC, no offense to anybody in the room, but we have HR here, we have someone from finance here, we have IT, we've got communications, we've got public safety, we've got human services representatives in the room. We might need one of them, or if we know the topic is going to be something specific, I think it's great to call them and make sure they participate in that discussion. But we don't need everyone that typically shows up at a staff meeting to necessarily show up to a legislative discussion about a specific bill. I just want to try to minimize the impact on having to interrupt someone else's schedule and make them come to a meeting that may not have any actual need to be there. Staff meetings are typically very inclusive. We invite everyone to come, and lots of people come or paying attention to these things. But these meetings can be much smaller. I think the commissioners need to be participative. They need to participate in these discussions. But we don't necessarily need everybody involved in these discussions, only people who are relevant to the actual bill that's being discussed. Just a point. Do we know right now which of our legislative priorities have any type of bill written or something that's germane to our priorities that are currently in the process somewhere in Topeka? I don't think we have that information that I'm aware of.
Well, Commissioner Howell, as you know, and you understand the process better than I do, even though I had some exposure to it as a lobbyist, unlike some of the bills we've had in the past, what you called the, I forget what you referred to the type of bills, but.
Germane, it's a bill that's germane to our issues.
Right. These are mostly funding issues that we have this year. So we're going through the appropriations process. Every one of these, or at least right now, I don't know of any bills creating a, or requesting a mental hospital down here. But most of the bills we have, except for the Charter Commission, which has already been through the legislative, been through that process, are all appropriations bills. And of course, Jason and Jessica are working the appropriation process, and that's a much different process than the ones we go through when we have a particular subject matter bill we want to get passed. The one you described, going through committees, getting a committee to pass it, going to the full Senate or the full House and getting it out before turnaround. We're going through the appropriations process, and in that process, the different state agencies each have the hearing or present to the subcommittees, and then the subcommittees later present their recommendations to the Ways and Means Committee or the House Appropriations Committee. It's a different process, and there are many places in that process where we can intervene and get and request the kind of funding we want. If we think more funding needs to go to community corrections, for instance, we can lobby that at any time. And so I guess I don't understand exactly when you talk about, do we know of any particular bills right now?
So even on those spending proposals, there needs to be a proviso or needs to be an amendment drafted that's presented to the Appropriations Committee by a committee member. They don't have typical hearings. They have hearings on spending proposals before the Appropriations Committee. They do have bill hearings. And it's an exempt committee, by the way. But we need to have someone draft, if you will, the proposal. It has to be black and white. It needs to be presented by a member of that committee. So if we're going to ask for $20 million for some local mental health organization that we want to create here, we need to actually have that written up by someone and presented to the committee. Let me give you one example. We talked a little bit about testing a minute ago. I think, based on what we understand right now, it's not on our platform, but it needs to be something we actually push forward as a BOCC priority. I want to see a proviso or an amendment to an existing bill that says that they're going to, if you will, earmark X number of dollars. And by the way, they're flush with cash right now. They've got $3 billion to figure out, which has never happened before in the history of our state. For them to earmark $1 million or $2 million or $10 million or whatever the number needs to be, earmarked for continued testing at the MDL in Sedgwick County, Kansas, I think we can make that proviso and have it presented at the Appropriations Committee. We need to make that a priority here. We need to write letters. We need to lobby for that. It's not on our platform, but it should be. So it's one of those things where we need to be flexible. We identified a new need or something comes up, like last year, Senate Bill 40, Senate Bill 13, hugely consequential bills. We had to pivot and flex to actually have testimony or even impact the natural course of those bills because they were very consequential to Sedgwick County. We ended up testifying on those, at least I did. I testified on both of those bills, I think. I'm pretty sure I did. Anyway, the bottom line is, even if it's an appropriations proposal, we have to have someone draft up an amendment or proviso or something that's presented by a member of that committee as they deliberate another bill, or it's presented as a something they need to consider, and they might even have a hearing on it. So even though it's an appropriations committee, it's still the same process. So every one of our spending proposals, I don't think we have a good status on where we're at with these things. And we need to develop, if you will, go down the list. Where is this one? Where is this one? And our lobbyists ought to be able to answer those questions. If these things need to have bills drafted, let's draft the bills. Let's get them introduced somewhere. And right now, that, as far as I know, is not happening on most of the things on our platform. But we have to drive the process. It doesn't happen without us pushing from our perspective. We have to push to make these things happen through our lobbyists and through members of these committees. And so I just want to, and the last thing I wanted to comment, based on what Commissioner Cruz said earlier, I want to say one more thing. We may not be testifying on behalf of the majority of this Board of County Commissioners or on behalf of Sedgwick County. I have no problem with someone testifying as an individual elected official, a Sedgwick County Commissioner, and speaking to that committee as a commissioner, not necessarily just as a citizen. It's okay to speak as a commissioner. You're not representing the viewpoints of anybody else. As long as you speak as an individual elected official, it's okay to do that. So you don't have to say as a citizen. You can simply say, as a commissioner of my district, I'd like to represent, if you will, a viewpoint or whatever. So thank you again, Chairman.
Thank you. Just clarify a couple things. We were talking about moving the staff meeting from Tuesday until Friday. And therefore, you were talking about not having all the folks at the staff meeting. I'm not so sure that that's a good idea because we cover a lot of other things than just the legislative agenda. So we'll probably have to have other folks in the room. So I hope that.
That's fine.
I just wanted to clarify that. The other thing is that as we're talking about who's going to go to Topeka and brief, I'm not talking about just commissioners because a lot of times our staff are the ones that are the experts on the subject matter. For example, one of the things we talked about yesterday was a bill that's working through the legislature based on elevators. Well, Chris Labram and his staff are the experts on the elevators, and currently, and we all know because we voted on it recently, is we have regulations on elevators. So for us to go up and testify wouldn't be the best decision. We would send someone like Chris Labram and we'd make that decision on who goes up to testify. So I just wanted to clarify a couple things, make sure everybody understood what our goal is if we move it from Tuesday until Friday. Commissioner Howe?
Since we're talking about this, let me just say there's two. I'm obviously passionate about the suspended driver's licenses. I'm going to push that issue as hard as I can. I'm also passionate about this, the wrap restraints and the extended use of prone positioning and mental health and physical health assessments as a priority when someone enters into the system of corrections in any way. I want to make sure we prioritize those things. Those are my personal positions. That doesn't represent necessarily the viewpoints of anybody else in this room or on this bench. I will push those issues, but there are some issues I'm very passionate about. One of them is Lindsay's, with respect to the being able to earmark funds over a end of a fiscal year without actually having. There's things we need to save for that are not capital, but there are other issues we need to save for, maybe multi-year funding. I want some latitude from the legislature. To me, that's an easy bill to write, and I would love to testify on that bill. I don't know why we haven't written that bill. We need to write that bill, and I would love to testify. So I'll just present to my colleagues. This is a very, very important to Sedgwick County. We've been talking about this all 7 years that I've been here. If you don't know the topic, let's talk about it again. But we need to write that bill. I would like to see that bill written today and introduced this week. We need to do that. And I would love to testify on that bill because it's so important to Sedgwick County. And it should be a BOCC position or at least a Sedgwick County position. The other thing I'll just want to say, I don't remember the bill number right now, but there's an issue came up with election results data. If you don't know, our general election of 2020, the report that came out of the election office in 2019 and before, they used a different format. It was very easy to pull that into an Excel spreadsheet and do analysis on election data. But since 2019, especially the 2020 election, say the general election 2020, the report is 2,700 pages long and it's inconsistent format. So to do what I did, to bring that into Excel and do analysis is virtually impossible. So there is a bill that requires, if you will, a consistent format that you can actually do analysis. I think that's important to me personally. I think it's important to people in Sedgwick County that want to understand what just happened with the election. It's important. So I plan on testifying on that bill. I don't know if anybody else cares about that, but I do. I've asked for us to kind of move our election results data back to something that's more usable. I've not gotten anywhere with that advocacy. So I think legislatively, to me, it's important. I would like to see that done this year. I plan on, again, the bill's already in bill form. I've asked for a committee hearing yesterday, and I believe there's going to be a committee hearing on that because I asked for it. So there's lots of issues like this. I didn't even know about this issue. I didn't think about this putting it in legislation 2 weeks ago, but we have an opportunity now. So I care deeply about that topic. I plan on engaging that with earnest and with passion, and I will do what I have to do there. But with that, I just want to say there's a lot of issues on our platform. that we need to write those pieces of legislation, and we have some responsibility to get that done. It doesn't happen without us making it happen. Putting it on the platform is the first step. What that means is we need to actually engage legislators to write the testimony, or I'm sorry, write the bill. If we don't work with legislators to write the bill, it's not going to happen. And so we care passionately about the issues on the platform, but we didn't, just putting them on the platform doesn't make it happen. We have responsibility to actually to carry the item through the entire legislative process. That's what that means. And right now, I don't think we've done that. So I'm very, very engaged in this topic, in all these ideas, but I guess I asked for everyone to kind of agree with me on what I just said. I hope we can be more effective because we understand what has to happen. Every one of us ought to have something we're working on legislatively, and I'm not sure we're all doing those things. But anyway, thank you again, Chairman. Appreciate the chance to speak again.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Howell. A couple of things on your points. I believe that every commissioner has an opportunity and the right to be able to go up to Topeka and speak on what they're passionate about. I have absolutely no problem with that. Some of the concerns that I see, though, and I appreciate your passion on the driver's license. It's mainly a city issue. It's not a county issue. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands when you go up and testify that it's not a county issue as you're testifying in favor of taking some kind of action on suspended driver's licenses. The RAP, we've already seen a tragic incident as a result of someone coming into JIAC wearing a RAP, but the Sedgwick County Sheriff does not use the RAP. The police department uses it. I don't know what the position of the National Police Chiefs Association is on how that protects their officers. I don't. You know, you're an individual that loves data. I would love to see the data on something like that. So I'm not ready to take a position on it because, again, it does not directly apply to the Sedgwick County Sheriff and his actions. So I want to make sure that we stay in our own lane when we're at Topeka testifying on any actions. So, Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. So a couple of things. I have to say that I do believe that this suspended driver's license bill does affect us. Sheriff's officers enact warrants. We do have those folks in our jail. I have a tragic story of a guy who got picked up on a suspended driver's license, and I'll save that for later. But can we ask and can we find out that data around the suspended driver's license and how that actually does affect Sedgwick County? I mean, I think that information is probably already available, so maybe we could make that available to all commissioners to remind us how it does affect Sedgwick County. I will be supporting that bill as well. But in addition to and I realize it's doubtful that some of the commission would support making a public statement regarding this, but I will be working with Kansas Representative Joanna Hoy for making changes to the Stand Your Ground law. I understand that is coming before the legislature. There's also another bill that we'll be working through, Senator Olitha Fauskido, talking about releasing of the JIAC video and legislation around that. So, I mean, there are things that we'll be working on outside of this, and so I just wanted to disclose that right now to make everybody aware of the things that I am working on with state legislators, in addition to what we as Sedgwick County have made our priority issues. And I would like to request that when we're talking about our legislative platform particularly, and the funding of it, when will be that discussion around that testimony? I did ask for a testimony for all of these, but particularly when will be the next time we have a discussion? I understand that commissioners are meeting with our legislators, but our lobbyists, but when will that be? I'd like to make a formal request to you, Tom, to have a conversation around who's writing that testimony, and I'd like to be in the room when it's crafted with Joan or Tim to talk about how we're going to be proactive in those testimonies, since that will come before our legislature this year. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just because you made some statements, I want to just say I respectfully disagree, and I certainly am fine with you having a different opinion. That's totally fine. But the suspended driver's license issue, the reason I bring this up as a county commissioner is because it is very impactful to Sedgwick County. We have 1/6 of the state's population, but we have one half the state's problem. And you say, well, how is this a county problem? Because we have people driving around in Sedgwick County without a driver's license because it's been suspended, and they end up having insurance issues. There's hit and run accidents. There's all kinds of things that happen. There's possibly car chases. People panic because they don't have a license. They get pulled over. They end up running from the police, fleeing a lewd type of thing, cause another accident, and they end up in jail. The consequences of not having a driver's license, it causes people to make lots of bad decisions, and I understand they shouldn't make those bad decisions, but these are people who are desperate to go to work and get money to pay for their kids, and there's no way for them to legally keep their job and to be successful and keeping their job and getting to work and back. We don't have a robust public transportation system in Wichita. These people make bad choices, and the majority of people in Sedgwick County are from Wichita. That's true. But we have a difference in how municipal court deals with this and how county court, I should say, how district court deals with this. But in terms of how important is this to Sedgwick County, I think it's very important to Sedgwick County. If I don't lead on this, no one will. This issue will not go anywhere without someone cheerleading the discussion, and that's what I'm trying to do here. With respect to the wrap restraints, let me argue once again, I respectfully disagree, but in 15 months, we went from, prior to 15 months ago, 0 use of wrap restraints in Wichita, and 0 use, again, as you said, Jack doesn't use them, the jail doesn't use them as far as I know, the sheriff doesn't use them, but WPD made a choice to use them. And we have no authority over WPD, but the legislature does, which is why I'm appealing this to the legislature. I think they've been overused. I think that there ought to be some guidelines on when they're allowed to be used and when they're not. I don't think they should be used on juveniles ever. We didn't used to use these. Now suddenly we used them 83 times in 15 months, 10 times on children from ages 13 to 17. I don't think that's reasonable. And again, maybe very, very good for those that are picking up and transporting somebody, but for someone in a mental health crisis, it's not good. And so I just think it escalates the crisis and makes it worse. So with that in mind, I think that we've overused the wrap restraints in Wichita. That's my personal opinion. And again, maybe very, very good for the folks that are actually in the process of apprehending somebody and picking them up and taking them in. But for someone in crisis, it's detrimental, in my personal opinion. And so I think that, again, since we have no authority over WPD, legislature does. That's why I brought this up. Everything else I brought up is potentially a county policy choice. The use of prone positioning, extended use of prone positioning, I think it should be state law. 116 people died in this country in 15 years, including George Floyd, because of extended use of prone positioning. I don't think we should be unaware of this risk. It comes back to training, and I think there should be state law that provides consequences for failure to, as a government authority, to a failure to basically respect someone's right not to be positioned in a prone position for extended periods of time because it's detrimental to them. I think it requires state law. We can do this through county policy and through county training, but I think it's a bigger issue than just Sedgwick County. And so I would like to see this done at the state level, which is why I brought that up. And I could go on, but my point is this. These are my personal opinions. I will lobby the legislature to see my side. I may be unsuccessful, but the conversation is good. And we need to have these conversations. And if everybody else in this room disagrees with me, that's fine. I have my opinions, and I will do what I need to do as an individual commissioner. Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez.
I think the one thing that we can probably all agree on up here is that we won't ever agree on everything. So I do think it's very important as we're going up and speaking to state people that we are not, when it's not on our legislative platform, when we don't have a consensus from the board, that we are not there as a commissioner, that we are there as an individual. We just talked about one thing in particular that the county just doesn't get a say in. And so I think it's detrimental to go as a commissioner and then infuse in that conversation things that are on our platform, because it gets unclear of if the individual is speaking or if the commission is speaking. So I do think that's something we need to look at, but if we're going as an individual to speak on something, I think it needs to be stated very clearly. That is an individual speaking and not as a commissioner from the county we are having this discussion. So that's all that I would add to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to interject one thing here. Commissioner Howe was talking about Zoom meetings and the flexibility of this and how quickly we could do this. And there's no question that there's no system we're going to come up with that's perfect to react as quickly as the legislature reacts in Topeka on bills. But we still have to comply with the Kansas Open Meetings Law, and nothing that's been said this morning is intended to suggest that we wouldn't continue operating under the Kansas Open Meetings Law. And that will still require reasonable notice. We would typically, even though the Attorney General has relaxed some of the rules during COVID, we would still probably have at least one or two commissioners in this room and others zooming in to still allow the public access, the media access to these meetings, because that's what's required under the Kansas Open Meetings Act. You can't do meetings just completely on Zoom and exclude any of these individuals. So, but we'll look at that and see what flexibility we have. But I just wanted to make it clear that we're all complying with the Kansas Open Meetings Act. So,
Okay. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I would like to ask a clarifying question. As long as it's stated that we are not speaking on behalf of the commission, we are still commissioners who are speaking, representing our community, representing our constituents. So as someone who is advocating for things, it's appropriate for us to say, I am here as a commissioner. I am not representing the commission. Is that an appropriate way to address a body? I am a commissioner. And so I want to make sure that it is okay for us to say we are commissioners if we disclose we are not representing the full body of the commission. Is that a correct or incorrect statement, Mr. Papoon?
I think that's the question you just brought up is one of the reasons we wanted to bring this up for discussion today. When we talked to Jason yesterday, he was talking about commissioners coming up and testifying as individual citizens. I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer to that. Yes, you represent a district, and yes, you are county commissioners, but we as a board adopt platforms, and if we have one commissioner that feels that his or her district ought to take positions contrary to that platform or in addition to that platform, I don't know if it's appropriate or not. I think it's a good question. What if we adopt a platform, for instance, that says that we want to expand Medicaid, for instance, and the board wants to do that, and one commissioner gets up and tries to represent that he or she represents 104,000 people, and we're opposed to expansion of Medicaid. I mean, is that something this board wants to happen? I don't know. I mean, I don't have a clear answer for it. I think it's a good question. You are commissioners, but I think it's a blurred line when you go up to Topeka and you testify, when you throw out that you're a commissioner, that it tends to give some credibility to your position as a member of this board that you wouldn't have if you just came up as a citizen. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Papoon, you have anything else to add to your portion?
No.
Mr. Manager, anything else?
No, sir, we're done. Or that's all we had.
Very good. Well, Commissioner Howell does.
I just wanted to, wrap up that thought. And I appreciate Commissioner Cruz actually asking that question. But my experience in the legislature is that as long as you clarify, I'm not representing something bigger than myself in terms of I don't represent this full board or the county government as a whole. But it is a fact, I am an elected official. And I have no reason to shy away from that truth. And if I want to speak as an elected official, I think I have every legal right to do that. And I think it is important that you disclose I'm doing this as an individual elected official. I don't represent my colleagues or the government as something larger than my personal position as an elected official. But I don't think there's any problem personally with testifying that way. And by the way, just to be clear, when I provided my testimony, it was on my personal letter, or I should say, my county commissioner, Jim Howell, as county commissioner letterhead, signed by me, and it was very clear what portion of that was on our platform and which portion of that was not. And I bifurcated that clearly to the committee. This is a portion that I believe represents a initiative that's on our platform. Now I'm going to change hats. I'm going to speak as individual commissioner. That doesn't represent. I don't represent anybody other than myself in my elected role. That's it. So I would like to say, from my experience in the legislature, I think it's fine to represent yourself as an elected official as long as you don't, confuse someone that I represent the BOCC or the county government. It's probably fine to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I don't see anything else. We have a board meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Until that time, I'll see everyone then. We're adjourned.